At 6:50, 2 in the morning, the kind of noise that jolts your soul awake came tearing through the cul-de-sac like a sonic boom made of ego and exhaust. It wasn't a garbage truck or a construction crew, it was worse. A fire-red Lamborghini Aventador, glistening like a wet cherry in the dawn light, ripped through the silence and slammed to a stop right across my driveway gate. Not in front of it, not near it. Directly across it like the driver had aimed for inconvenience with sniper precision. I stood frozen in my kitchen, coffee halfway to my lips, watching from the window in complete disbelief. And then, like a scene from a surreal parody, she emerged. Designer sunglasses, platinum blonde bun perched high like a crown, and a hot pink windbreaker that read, "Mindset over mayhem." She popped open her door like she was stepping onto a runway, not someone else's private driveway, and began unrolling a yoga mat right on the edge of my property. Didn't knock, didn't glance around, didn't even acknowledge that she'd just illegally parked a 300 car in front of my only exit. Nope. Instead, she pulled out her phone, positioned it with influencer-level precision, and spoke loud enough to make the birds flee the nearest tree. Welcome back to Mindset with Karen. Today we're reclaiming space emotionally, physically and spiritually. That includes parking wherever the universe opens up for you. She said it like she was quoting the Dalai Lama, but with more Botox and less self-awareness. I stared, speechless, toothbrush still dangling from my mouth. Her voice pierced the morning like a laser pointer to the cornea. I wasn't even sure what stunned me more, the fact that someone could be that boldly obnoxious, or that she was doing it all while squatting on a mat that was technically on my side of the sidewalk. That's when it hit me. She wasn't here by accident. This was deliberate. A statement. A power move made by someone who thought the rules were made for other people. My name's Ben. I'm a quiet guy, ex-military engineer. I moved to this sleepy neighborhood to get away from bureaucratic nonsense and ego-fueled politics. My property sits just outside the official HOA zone, which used to mean peace and freedom. But ever since Karen moved in, that peace had been eroding one manicured passive-aggressive action at a time. She wasn't just a neighbor, she was a one-woman HOA coup with a TikTok account and a legal pad full of imaginary bylaws. And this morning was her latest declaration of war. I threw on jeans and a black t-shirt, grabbed my briefcase, and headed outside. I had a job interview at 9:00 a.m. One I'd prepped for over the past month. The company? Atlas Defense Systems. The kind of place where discipline, punctuality, and not being late due to Lamborghini-related yoga blockades actually mattered. As I stepped onto the gravel, Karen looked up from her downward dog and flashed me that saccharine smile, the kind that could curdle fresh milk. "Morning, Ben." Love the casual look. Very rustic rebel. I stopped just short of her rearview mirror and stared her down. "You're blocking my driveway. I need to leave." She stretched her arms like she hadn't heard a word. Then, with perfect smugness, said, "Community access lanes aren't private property during wellness hours. You should have read the updated guidelines." My eyebrows furrowed. "What updated guidelines?" She shrugged. "We had a vote last Thursday. Section 12C now includes emotional flow zones from 6:30 to 9:00 a.m. It passed unanimously." I blinked. "You and who?" "Mr. Sprinkles," she said, dead serious. "He's our vice president now." He abstained, but he supports the vision. Mr. Sprinkles, by the way, is her cat, a Himalayan. Possibly possessed. I clenched my jaw. I could feel the pulse building in my temple, the old military itch, the one that flared up when logic failed and petty power plays tried to masquerade as law. I glanced at her car custom plates that read, "Cron Loves," gleaming with menace. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an invasion. And her yoga mat wasn't about wellness, it was a turf flag. A bright pastel-colored line in the sand. I gave her one last warning. Calm. Direct. "Move the car, or I'll find another way out." She took a slow sip of her kale mint smoothie through a metal straw, then narrowed her eyes behind those oversized shades. "Is that a threat?" I smiled the way soldiers smile when they've already decided how the day ends. "Not yet." Then I turned and walked away past the perfectly trimmed hedges she fined the Robinsons for, past the lamppost she claimed was her personal meditation beacon, and toward the barn at the far end of my property. Because if Karen wanted to play queen of the cul-de-sac, She was about to find out what happens when you block the wrong king. Back inside the house, I paced, back and forth. The seconds on the wall clock weren't just ticking, they were laughing. My interview window was shrinking fast, and Karen was still out there on my sidewalk, filming her content and sipping whatever kale celery concoction she called breakfast. I'd tried logic. I'd tried warning her. I even called the local non-emergency line, hoping they'd send someone out to deal with the vehicle that was quite literally barricading me in. But the dispatcher's voice was sluggish with red tape. Technically, sir, since your residence is adjacent to a community zone and the vehicle is not abandoned or in obvious violation, enforcement may take several hours. Several hours. The words hit like a slap with a velvet glove. Polite, ineffective, and completely useless to someone who had 15 minutes to get to a job interview that might change his life. The line went dead, and something inside me clicked. A familiar heat flushed through my chest. Not anger exactly, but that dangerous clarity that soldiers get when a situation goes from manageable to mission critical. It was the same feeling I had when a bridge design failed mid-test back in Kandahar, and we had 10 minutes to rig a workaround under sniper fire. That moment where the world gets real quiet, and your mind starts mapping out every possible exit, every tool in reach, every angle of attack. I looked out the window again. Karen was now seated cross-legged, eyes closed, as if she were meditating on how much chaos she could manufacture before noon. Her Lambo sat like a gleaming red middle finger in my path. Then my eyes shifted past her, down the gravel trail that led to the old barn behind the house. A smile crept across my face, because she didn't know. None of them did. Behind those oak planks and rusted hinges was a beast she could never control. My collection, my therapy, my legacy. And right in the center of it all, parked like a sleeping dragon, was a fully restored M60 Patton main battle tank. Street legal, registered, insured, and ready. It wasn't just a prop. It wasn't some museum piece rusting in a shed. This was a functioning, rumbling 52-ton reminder that sometimes the best way to handle bureaucracy gone wild is with treads and 105 millimeters of retired authority. I'd spent 3 years restoring that tank, stripped it down bolt by bolt, rewired the hydraulics, reinforced the armor plating, painted it military gray, and polished every last panel. It wasn't a weapon anymore, legally speaking, but it was still a statement, a declaration that some lines shouldn't be crossed, and right now Karen's Lamborghini was parked across one of them. Still, I wasn't ready to go full scorched earth not yet. First, I wanted to be sure. I pulled up the county parcel map, zoning data, and land records. Sure enough, my house wasn't part of the HOA. Never had been. But as I dug deeper, I saw something else. A recent amendment submitted by Karen Blakeleith Queen herself. The map had been altered, redrawn. And there, traced in pink highlighter and submitted to the county clerk's office, was a new boundary loop, awkwardly curving around my property like a child had spilled juice on a blueprint. She had extended her HOA map to include my land. Illegally, sloppily, boldly. She had submitted an annexation request under temporary review status and somehow got a rubber stamp. No hearings. No notices. No due process. It was fraudulent at worst, manipulative at best. And even worse, she'd backdated it to make it look like it had already passed into effect. That meant the letters, the citations, the smug declarations about community hours, all of it was rooted in fiction. A power grab dressed up in pastel pink ink and wrapped in bureaucracy. As I stared at the screen, I felt the last remnants of patience peel off like old paint. My interview was gone. My morning was hijacked. And now my property rights were being eroded by a woman who named her cat Vice President. I closed the laptop slowly, stood up, and grabbed the keys hanging on the hook by the back door. There was no more time for negotiation, no more calls, no more paperwork. It was time for Karen to learn what happens when you build a paper kingdom on someone else's steel. The tank wasn't just a machine. It was a message, one that spoke in diesel and dominance. And today, it had something to say. By the time the sun peeked over the neighbor's rooftop the next morning, something in the air had changed. You could feel it, the tension hanging between bird chirps and the crunch of gravel under feet. I stepped out onto my porch, mug in hand, still replaying every minute of yesterday's disaster. No job interview, no apologies. Just a laminated courtesy notice, left like a calling card by the self-declared empress of the cul-de-sac. But what really set my blood pressure to a boil wasn't the missed opportunity, or the glittery HOA envelope still flapping in the breezite, was the sheer smugness with which Karen had walked away, acting like she'd won. Her car was gone for the moment, probably off getting detailed, but I knew she'd be back. Karen wasn't the type to drop a stunt and disappear. She always circled back to gloat, to film it, to name it content, which is why I spent that morning doing what no HOA guideline, no fake zoning map, and certainly no pink track-suited tyrant could stop me from doing. I opened the barn doors. There it stood in the amber morning light like a metallic monument to stubbornness, the M60 pattern, fully restored, purring silently as I did a systems check. Hydraulics solid, treads balanced, engine primed. I'd fueled it the night before. I didn't sleep much, but I didn't need to. My mind was clear, not vengeful, just focused. Karen had mistaken my silence for surrender, my civility for submission. But I hadn't spent years maintaining a 50-ton piece of military history just to let a yoga influencer with HOA delusions redefine my property line. So I climbed in, strapped down, and rolled it forwards low, steady, decisive. The barn doors widened like curtains parting on a theater stage, and out she came. The ground trembled just enough to rattle pebbles on the pavement, but not enough to shake me. This was precision, purpose, and this time, the HOA had parked the wrong car in the wrong place. Karen had returned not 10 minutes earlier. Her Lambo casually dropped in the same spot like it was her own personal driveway. She was stretching beside it again, filming some nonsense about manifesting presence, when the tank rounded the bend and rolled into full view. I didn't stop. I didn't honk. I didn't even look at her. I kept my hands steady, my eyes forward, as the tank's treads crushed gravel, chewed up the manicured grass border she was so proud of, and rolled straight toward the red beacon of her arrogance. The sound of steel and rubber meeting Italian sports car was unlike anything I've ever heard. A squeal, a crunch, and then a beautiful, horrifying silence. The Lambo folded like a soda can under the sheer weight of the tank's body. Glass burst out in sparkling shards. The hood crumpled like tissue paper. The carbon fiber screamed and snapped in bitter surrender. Karen shrieked, not a normal shrieker, panicked, guttural wail that started somewhere deep in her pastel-clad soul. She staggered back, mouth agape, smoothie slipping from her hand and splattering onto the pavement like a green flag of defeat. I brought the tank to a stop directly over what used to be the Lamborghini's driver's side door. Then I cut the engine. The silence afterward was almost sacred. Karen stood frozen, processing what had just happened, while neighbors peeked from behind blinds, too stunned to even record it. She finally managed to shout, "That's destruction of property. That's criminal. You're done, Ben. Done." But I didn't say a word. I just opened the hatch, stepped out, and looked at her like someone who was done asking. This wasn't about escalation. This was about enforcement. The real kind. Not the HOA kind made with glitter pens and emotional blackmail. I walked past her like she wasn't even there and went back inside. The Lambo was still hissing under the tank's weight. The message had been sent. Loud, clear, unforgettable. Of course, it didn't take long for Karen to rally the troops. A few hours later, she showed up with a small army of clipboard-holding sidekicks. 2 of them were HOA enforcers, at least that's what their laminated badges claimed. One was a guy in loafers with a Bluetooth earpiece who looked like he'd been hired off Craigslist an hour ago. The other wore khakis and a tucked-in shirt that screamed, "Middle management cosplay." Karen marched right up to the gate with the swagger of someone who still thought she had the upper hand. "You've committed multiple violations," she announced, holding up a stack of papers like they were scrolls of justice. "Destruction of community aesthetics, threatening vehicular presence, unauthorized combat-grade vehicle on residential land." I didn't flinch. Instead, I stepped forward with a folder of my own. Inside was everything. The original property deed, the tank's historic registration, insurance papers, and the letter from a state legislator endorsing the tank as an educational restoration project. I handed it over to the clipboard guy in khakis. His eyes scanned the top page, then the next, then the third. His forehead creased. Karen leaned in, trying to keep up. "Don't be intimidated," she snapped at him. He's just trying to drown us in paperwork. But the guy stepped back and quietly said, legally, he's protected. This is federal code. Section 18B. Karen's face dropped. Like an app that had just crashed, she tried to pivot. But it's dangerous, it's loud, it's registered, inspected. And not your concern, I said, folding my arms. Then came the coup de grace. Karen's car was gone, flattened beyond recognition. But that wasn't her biggest loss. Her biggest loss was the reaction. Because the HOA enforcers, they didn't back her. They didn't throw citations at me. They walked away, slowly, silently, like men who realized they were pawns in a game they didn't want to play. Karen stayed behind, trembling with frustration, eyes locked on the tank like it had personally ruined her brand. She didn't scream. Not again. She just whispered, "This isn't over." I nodded. "Good," I said. "Wouldn't be fun if it was." Then I went back inside, already planning the next step. Because Karen had just learned what happens when a Lamborghini meets a line in the dirt that can't be moved. And she hadn't even seen what came next. The aftermath should have been the end of it. You'd think flattening a Lamborghini with a military tank would be enough to end any HOA turf war, but not when the opponent is Karen. She wasn't just obsessed with control, she was addicted to attention, and losing the battle for my driveway only meant she was already crafting a new war plan, one that wouldn't be won with pink envelopes or fake citations. This time, she pivoted, reinvented herself. Overnight, Karen stopped playing the victim and started playing the influencer. She turned my tank me, fully restored my 60, my symbol of peace through power, into the backdrop of her new personal brand. I logged into the HOA group chat I'd been forcibly added to weeks earlier, only to find it exploding with announcements. Community Wellness Showcase this Saturday. Driveway yoga returns now, featuring historic vibes. She attached pictures, dozens of them, some from old posts, others newly taken Karen in warrior pose, smiling serenely in front of my tank. She'd even photoshopped out the flattened Lamborghini like it had never existed. A banner on her flyer read, "Find inner peace beside icons of strength." I stared at the screen in disbelief. She had turned my defiance into her backdrop. That wasn't all. 2 days later, a truck rolled up in front of my house. A delivery guy hopped out and casually informed me that he was there to drop off a portable stage, speakers, and some yoga canopies for a community event. I asked who had approved it. "Karen from HOA," he said, pointing to her name on the delivery slip. "She's got the permit." Permit? From who? She didn't answer to the city. This was HOA landland that stopped at my property line. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she was throwing a festival at the edge of my fence and using my tank as the unofficial mascot. I told the guy to turn around. He shrugged and rerouted to Karen's house. Within hours, her front yard looked like the staging area for a wellness Coachella. Foldable chairs, pastel balloons, flamingo inflatables, even a refreshment stand shaped like a pineapple. It was a nightmare wearing a headband and a sports bra. But she wasn't done. Karen was playing the long game, and now her weapon wasn't fines or threats, it was public opinion. She invited local influencers, small-time bloggers, and even a food truck. They started posting selfies with my barn in the background, tagging things like Iron Zen and tanks for the stretch. She had twisted the entire narrative. I wasn't the guy defending his property anymore. I was the grumpy tank man harshing the HOA's vibe. The final straw came when I received a glossy postcard in my mailbox. On the front, Karen posed beside my tank with the caption, "Peace beside power, join the movement." On the back, the event schedule was printed in gold font. 9:00 a.m. Guided yoga flow. 10:00 a.m. Mindfulness chat with Karen. 11:00 a.m. Group meditative. Walk along the borderline. Borderline. As in, my fence. She'd turned my land into her punchline. So, I pivoted too. I stopped reacting and started broadcasting. I posted online about the tank's restoration, shared photos of the process, wrote about its history, about the role it played and how I'd preserved it for educational purposes. I invited veterans, mechanics, even a few local schools, not as a stunt, but as a statement. The story wasn't hers to twist anymore, and when Karen's event finally rolled around, it didn't unfold the way she envisioned. Sure, the folding chairs were set, the canopies were up, and a modest crowd gathered with yoga mats and iced kombucha in hand. But just as Karen took the mic and began her speech about reclaiming communal harmony, I flipped the ignition inside the barn. The tank engine came to life with a deep, slow growl that rippled through the soil. The sound stopped Karen mid-sentence. Some of the guests chuckled nervously. Others turned toward the source. Then I drove it forward carefully, deliberately, and parked it right at the edge of my property. It didn't cross the line. It didn't threaten. It existed, proudly, unapologetically, the symbol of the one thing Karen couldn't manipulate: boundaries. From that moment on, her narrative cracked. People left the event early. The influencer with the drone packed up. One of the bloggers changed her post caption from HOA Zen Queen to awkward backyard yoga war. Karen kept trying to speak over the low purr of the tank's engine, but the spell had broken. By noon, the chairs were empty, the flamingos were deflated, and Karen stood alone, on a tiny pastel-colored stage, looking like she'd just been photobombed by reality. That night, I found a new envelope, but this one wasn't glittery. It wasn't written in pink gel pen. It was formal, heavy, and stamped with the official HOA seal, a summons. I was being ordered to appear at a neighborhood conflict resolution hearing. The accusation? Intimidating display of militarized equipment, excessive patriotic imagery, and threat to communal emotional wellness. It was co-signed by a so-called HOA attorney named Brock Hensley, who a quick search revealed was Karen's third cousin and a certified paralegal only in the state of delusion. She was escalating again, grasping for legal authority she didn't have, but this time, I was ready. I went back to the county clerk's office, spoke to an actual supervisor, showed them the zoning maps, the forged amendments, the fake permits. The man behind the counter leaned back and frowned. "They scheduled a hearing on your property," he asked. "But your house was never part of the HOA." He tapped a few keys. "Yeah, this is illegal. They can't govern a property that never opted in. And these amendments? They're invalid. You're exempt. By statute." Those words felt like the first real victory in weeks. Karen hadn't just overstepped, she'd tripped over her own imaginary laws, and now it was catching up with her. But she didn't see it coming. The day of the meeting arrived with the kind of pageantry only Karen could conjure: banners, folding tables, fresh pastries, and an ego inflated to the point of rupture. I hadn't planned on attending. I figured the petition, the county review, the broken Lambo, and the crumbling narrative would be enough. But when I saw the crowd forming, I knew I had to be there. Not to fight, just to witness, just to remind them that this story wasn't hers to rewrite. I walked in, just as Karen stepped to the front. She launched into a speech about unifying aesthetics, about emotional security, about the threat of unregulated historical machinery, without ever saying my name, but every word pointed in my direction. Then I stepped forward, not with anger, not with a raised voice, just presence, a quiet reminder that the person she'd tried to paint as a villain had never lifted a finger in aggression. She'd pushed. I'd stood still. She lied. I documented. And just when the tension was thickest, the unmistakable rumble of diesel echoed down the street. The tank appeared, slowly rolling into view. I wasn't driving it. My friend Carlos, a vet and parade-certified operator, was at the helm. Draped over the front was a banner that read, "Historical artifact preserved, protected, legal." The crowd broke into applause. The tension snapped. Karen tried to rally her final defense, pointing at the tank and calling it a symbol of fear, but no one was listening. Then, a new voice spoke. A county official in a crisp navy blazer stepped forward and read from a statement. Karen's map changes were null, her surveillance equipment unauthorized, her use of HOA funds for private events without board approval, grounds for suspension. Effective immediately, Karen Blakely was no longer HOA president. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She just stepped down, quietly, heels clicking against the pavement, shrinking with every step. As the crowd dispersed and the tank rolled to a stop near my curb, I felt something shift, not just for May, but for the entire neighborhood. Days later, Evelyn from 2 houses down the same one Karen once fined for using unlicensed wind chimes rang my doorbell. She handed me a basket, a toy tank, a toy Lambo, a bottle of wine, and a handwritten note that read, "Next time, just run it over sooner." Karen hadn't just lost power, she'd lost relevance. And in the end, that was always her greatest fear.